The captain's abandonment. In August 1702, a really pivotal incident occurred under Admiral John Benbow, known for his courage and blunt manner. Basically, what happened was during a crucial naval engagement, several of his own captains completely deserted him, leading to disgrace for the British Navy and severe consequences for those involved. The reasons behind their actions to this day remain unclear, which is where the whole mystery comes from. The conflict took place during the War of Spanish Succession, where England, France, and Spain were vying for control of the West Indies. Spain, aligned with France, had long dominated the Caribbean, but England was expanding its presence, especially on islands like St. Christopher. Then, in September 1701, Vice Admiral Benbow was tasked with protecting British interests in the region. Despite King William III's reluctance to let him go, Benbow took command of a squadron to defend British lives and property in the West Indies. Benbow's rise in the Navy was sort of unusual. Coming from humble beginnings as the son of a tanner, he had worked his way up from the merchant marine. His directness and no-nonsense attitude often put him at odds with the more aristocratic officers, many of whom valued refinement and social status over skill. Despite this though, Benbow became Rear Admiral and earned a reputation as a capable leader, though his rough manner did make him some enemies within the Navy. Benbow also demonstrated both bravery and unconventional tactics. For example, one notable incident involved him fighting off pirates while in the merchant marine. It's said that after killing 13 pirates, he preserved their heads in brine and presented them to Spanish authorities for a reward. Whether this story is entirely true or embellished over time, it became a defining part of his early reputation and contributed to his rise in the Royal Navy. By 1702, war had broken out over the Spanish Succession, and Benbow was once again in the West Indies. His opponent in this campaign was Admiral Jean Ducasse of France. Benbow's squadron encountered Ducasse's fleet near Cartagena, Colombia. Although Ducasse wasn't really looking for a fight, Benbow ordered his ships to engage. Over the next 6 days, however, Benbow's captains inexplicably refused to support him. Despite repeated orders, most of Benbow's captains stayed back, leaving only his flagship, the Breda, and the smaller Ruby to engage the French. As the days passed, Benbow grew increasingly frustrated with his captains' reluctance to follow orders. Even after direct signals to join the fight, most of the squadron remained distant. Only Captain Vincent of the Falmouth eventually asked permission to assist, but the Ruby was already too damaged to continue. Despite the lack of support, Benbow pressed on with the Breda and the Falmouth. They managed to damage a French ship, and it seemed possible that they might capture it. However, during the night, Benbow was severely injured when a cannonball shattered his leg. Refusing to leave the deck, he continued to command from a cot. The next day, the remaining English ships once again failed to act, allowing the French to tow their damaged ship to safety. Benbow, completely enraged by his captain's inaction, sent them a message urging them to act like Englishmen. Instead, Captain Richard Kirby of the Defiance boarded the Breda and argued that continuing the fight would just lead to disaster. Kirby also presented a document signed by all the captains except Vincent and Fogg, who was the captain of the Breda, claiming that the squadron should withdraw. They cited a lack of men and ammunition along with damage to their ships, though their reluctance had been clear from the start. Frustrated and in severe pain, Benbow had no choice but to call off the engagement and return to Jamaica. Upon his return, Benbow's leg was amputated and he barely survived the fever that followed. Despite his condition, he firmly pushed for a court-martial to try the captains who had defied him. 5 captains, Kirby, Wade, Constable, Vincent, and Fogg were then brought to trial. Kirby and Wade were found guilty of cowardice and sentenced to death, while Constable was dismissed from the Navy for disobeying orders. Though Vincent and Fogg had signed the document, they were not punished, as they had been pressured by the others. Kirby and Wade were then executed aboard HMS Bristol in 1703, but Benbow did not live to see it, as he succumbed to his injuries in November 1702. But yeah, the motives behind the actions of Kirby, Wade, and the other captains still remain a mystery. Some speculate that resentment toward Benbow's background and his rough manner may have driven them to defy his orders. It's known that Benbow's directness often clashed with the more refined officers, and personal grievances may have played a role. However, it's kinda difficult to believe that such animosity would lead them to literally risk their careers and reputations in the midst of a battle. But yeah, overall, why they chose to abandon their posts, knowing the consequences, is a question that has never been fully answered. Gordon Collins' disappearance. In April 1991, Gordon Collins was on a vacation near Santa Rosalia, Baja Peninsula, with his girlfriend Anastasia Seals and another couple, Wayne Schwartz and Arlene Burlington. The group rented a boat despite warnings of a brewing storm. The next day, a fierce storm hit the coast, and the group never returned. Hotel employees later found the overturned boat and the bodies of Anastasia and Wayne. Gordon and Arlene, however, were missing, sparking a wide search by the US Coast Guard over a 250-mile area with no further discoveries. As time passed, it seemed clear that Gordon and Arlene had perished at sea. The families were asked to sign death certificates, but soon reports surfaced that Gordon might still be alive. Witnesses in Mexico reported sightings of a man matching Gordon's description, leading his parents to investigate further. Two local fishermen claimed they saw a man covered in cuts and wearing only shorts emerge from the ocean after the storm, attempting to board a bus. This sighting encouraged Gordon's parents, John and Mary Lou Collins, who believed their son had survived. Gordon's parents then began their search in the area following reports of people who had allegedly seen Gordon. They traced his movements from taco stands to local towns where individuals claimed to have seen him moments earlier. However, after getting close to finding him in La Paz, the trail abruptly went cold as locals clammed up and stopped providing information. Over the next 3 months, Gordon was reportedly seen more than 50 times across several locations near La Paz and Cabo San Lucas. His parents even hired private investigator Bill Garcia, who received calls from a small village, Colonia Vicente Guerrero, 300 miles south of Tijuana. The villagers insisted that a man resembling Gordon had stayed there for several months, surviving on handouts and living in isolation. One key sighting occurred when the man identified as Gordon was arrested for stealing food. A local sheriff then brought in an American resident, James Hatfield, to translate. Hatfield was certain that the man he encountered was Gordon, as the man introduced himself as Gordy. However, the man moved on before Garcia could reach him, and once again, the search hit a dead end. But yeah, over the following year, sporadic sightings of Gordon continued, but none were definitive. The US consulate eventually reversed its stance, no longer presuming Gordon to be dead. Despite the numerous reports, Gordon has never been found, and his whereabouts remain a mystery. His parents, especially his father John, held out hope for years that their son had somehow survived and was out there, lost but alive. Sadly though, Gordon's mother, Mary Lou, passed away in 1999 without ever learning the fate of her son. To this day, the case remains unsolved. While some believe Gordon may have suffered from amnesia or chose to disappear, others are more skeptical. The sightings, while numerous, were never fully confirmed, and Gordon's ultimate fate is still unknown. But yeah, overall, the mystery of what happened after that stormy day in April 1991 lingers, leaving his family and those who followed the case wondering what became of Gordon Collins. Moo and Lemuria. Moo and Lemuria are believed to be two really interesting ancient submerged continents. These lands, which were submerged beneath the oceans, are believed to have predated civilizations like Atlantis. Moo was thought to have existed in the Pacific Ocean, while Lemuria was said to lie beneath the Indian Ocean, both considered potential cradles of humanity by some, despite modern scientific evidence debunking that claim. Lemuria's name comes from the lemur, which, if you don't know, is a small primate whose habitat spans Madagascar, Africa, India, and Malaysia. The wide range of lemur habitats has led some, like cryptozoologist Philip L. Slater, to speculate that there was once a massive landmass connecting these areas, a theory that gave birth to the idea of Lemuria. This theory was supported by figures like Alfred Russel Wallace, who believed this ancient continent might have once covered a vast area, from West Africa to Southeast Asia. Despite being based on the distribution of lemurs though, this concept was accepted by many during the time of its proposal. Ernest Haeckel, who's a German biologist, went so far as to assert that Lemuria was the birthplace of all mankind, offering a theory of human migration that aligned with his ideas of human origin. Though the theory of Lemuria has since been largely abandoned by scientists, it sort of found a new life in the realms of myth and mysticism. For example, Madame Blavatsky, who's a really big figure in the Theosophical movement, integrated the concept into her spiritual beliefs. According to her description, the Lemurians were an ancient race of beings who inhabited Earth long before modern humans, described as giant ape-like creatures with little intellect. Later, these beings were said to have evolved into the Atlanteans, which were a race of humans who eventually succumbed to corruption and were destroyed. Blavatsky even claimed that the Lemurians would re-emerge in a future era, with the sunken continent rising once again from the ocean's depths. And following Blavatsky, W. Scott Elliott elaborated on these ideas in a more physical sense. He described the Lemurians as tall, primitive beings with brown skin and flat faces who possessed a third eye in the back of their heads. This third eye, according to Scott Elliott, eventually receded into the brain, becoming the pineal gland that modern science acknowledges today. The Lemurians were also said to have engaged in strange reproductive habits, initially laying eggs and later evolving into beings that reproduced in a more familiar way. Also, one of the most interesting elements of Scott Elliott's account was the idea that these early humans interbred with animals, leading to the creation of apes. He also claimed that visitors from Venus played a role in guiding the Lemurians toward a more civilized state. Basically, his writings reflect a mix of evolutionary speculation and fantastical ideas that mixed scientific thought with occult beliefs. The Lemurian narrative took another turn with the ideas of Rudolf Steiner, an Austrian philosopher and founder of anthroposophy. Steiner depicted the Lemurians as really strong but simple beings, slow to develop the power of speech but with the ability to lift heavy objects. He claimed that their evolution was also closely tied to their discovery of sexual reproduction, a concept they initially approached with a sense of duty rather than pleasure. Steiner's version of Lemurian history portrayed them as gradually becoming more sophisticated as their physical and mental capabilities evolved. And while Lemuria might seem like pure myth, the notion of lost lands beneath the sea persisted through many cultures. Early maps, long before the Lemurian idea emerged, often showed a large mysterious landmass in the southern hemisphere, dubbed Terra Australis Incognita. Although later exploration revealed no such land, some believe that these maps were based on ancient accounts of now submerged continents like Lemuria or Moo. Moo, like Lemuria, was thought to be an ancient civilization, but it occupied the Pacific Ocean. Descriptions of Moo, especially from James Churchward's book The Lost Continent of Moo, painted a picture of a sophisticated civilization that had mastered agriculture, architecture, and seafaring. According to Churchward, Moo's inhabitants were a diverse group of people, and they lived a prosperous and idyllic life. However, the continent was eventually destroyed by cataclysmic events, sinking into the ocean and leaving behind only the islands that now dot the Pacific. Churchward even went as far as claiming that the remnants of Moo's civilization could still be seen in the temples and stone structures found on islands such as Easter Island, known for its iconic stone statues, and other islands across the Pacific. Churchward's theories on Moo basically tied into broader speculations about lost civilizations, suggesting that Moo had colonized much of the world, including Atlantis. His account of Moo's destruction detailed how earthquakes and volcanic eruptions led to the collapse of this once great civilization, with its survivors scattered across the remaining islands. The remaining people struggling for survival turned to cannibalism in their desperation, according to Churchward's narrative. In addition to Churchward's writings, other figures also contributed to the whole thing around Moo and Lemuria. Explorers and spiritualists such as John Ballew Newborough and Edgar Cayce offered their own takes on these lost lands, blending ideas of ancient history with spiritual visions and prophecies. Newborough, for instance, wrote about a northern Pacific continent called Pan, which he claimed had sunk 24,000 years ago, predicting that it would begin to resurface in the 1980s. While the scientific community now moved away from theories like Lemuria and Moo, interest in the submerged continents persisted in fringe theories and spiritual beliefs. The idea of a lost landmass connecting far-off regions, once thought to explain the migration of animals like the lemur, has been largely replaced by the modern understanding of plate tectonics and continental drift. But yeah, the mystery of Moo and Lemuria still sort of stands, and people still believe in, the whole theories and everything around it. The Irish monks and America. In a time when much of Western Europe was in turmoil, Irish monks sought refuge from the chaos, choosing a life of prayer and solitude in remote, isolated regions. Along the western coast of Ireland and into the far reaches of the Scottish Isles, including the Faroes and Iceland, these monks established communities in the most desolate places. Despite their intentions of withdrawal, many were driven to explore beyond their immediate surroundings. The idea of exploration was deeply rooted in the Celtic belief in an other world, which spanned across the sea and was a place of peace and delight. This belief, which was influenced by Christian teachings, became the monks' quest for a promised land, not just an earthly paradise, but a place of spiritual reward for those of great virtue. This desire led Irish monks to embark on long sea voyages, with St. Brendan the Abbot being one of the most famous among them. The voyage of St. Brendan recounts the travels of this monk, raising the question of whether Irish monks may have reached North America nearly 1,000 years before Columbus. Written around 800 AD, the manuscript includes a series of seafaring tales that might stretch back centuries, recounting Brendan's journey to a promised land. While some scholars view it as a collection of myths, Brendan himself is not a fictional figure. He was actually born in County Kerry around 489 AD and was known for founding monasteries and traveling to various places, including the Scottish Islands and possibly the Faroes and Brittany. But the mystery arises as to whether Brendan and his companions reached North America on these voyages. It's important to note that the writing is filled with fantastical elements. For instance, during one voyage, Brendan and his crew landed on what they believed to be an island, only for it to move beneath them, revealed to be a sea creature. They were also said to have encountered burning rocks hurled at them from a distant island and choirs of people chanting hymns in desolate places. While such stories might seem far-fetched, they might contain symbolic meanings rather than literal accounts. However, one significant part of the story, which is the mention of a boat made from oxhide tanned in oak bark, sparked renewed interest. Basically, in the 1970s, Tim Severin, which is an Oxford graduate and experienced explorer, became fascinated by the practical details in the writing. He noted that the descriptions closely aligned with the possible route to North America known as the Stepping Stone Route, which led from Ireland to Newfoundland. Severin also took particular note of the writing's mention of a leather bow, which is a detail dismissed by many as fantastical. The general belief was that wet leather would deteriorate too quickly to withstand an Atlantic crossing. Yet Severin wondered whether this assumption could be wrong. He resolved to recreate Brendan's voyage using an authentic leather boat to see if such a craft could survive the journey to North America. Severin's project began with him constructing a boat using only materials that would have been available in the 6th century. He sourced ox hides, had them tanned using traditional methods, and had the boat constructed with a wooden frame tied together with leather thongs. The hides were then sewn onto the frame and layers of wool grease were applied to preserve and waterproof the leather. After 3 years of preparation, the boat was finally ready in 1976. Named Brendan after the monk, the 38-foot boat was fitted out with simple flat sails and a steering paddle. The boat's crew consisted of experienced sailors, but none knew what challenges the North Atlantic would present. The Brendan then set sail from Ireland in May 1976, tracing a path similar to one described in the writing. After leaving Ireland, the crew made their way up to the coast and faced their first test, which was a storm that pushed the boat 100 miles off course. Remarkably though, the leather boat held up under the harsh conditions, boosting the crew's confidence. To cut all the specific details of what exactly happened at the voyage, basically, Brendan finally reached Newfoundland in June 1977, completing the 4,500-mile journey. Severin's successful recreation of St. Brendan's voyage proved that it was indeed possible for a 6th century leather boat to cross the Atlantic. So yeah, while the fantastical elements of the writing remain open to interpretation, the journey itself suggests that Irish monks, including Brendan, may have reached North America long before the Vikings or Columbus. The question now is whether archaeological evidence, like the remnants of Irish-style huts or inscriptions, will one day confirm that Brendan and his fellow monks were among the earliest explorers of the New World. The Tedo Cloud. On a peaceful spring day in 1878, the people of southwest England were enjoying a calm afternoon when a strange dark cigar-shaped cloud appeared in the sky. The day had been clear, but the sudden appearance of this unusual formation caught the attention of those who noticed it. As the cloud passed, the weather changed abruptly. The temperature dropped, fierce winds began to blow, and a sharp snowfall followed, catching everyone by surprise. On the Clifton Suspension Bridge and throughout the area, pedestrians and those in carriages scrambled to find shelter as the air filled with thunder and the bridge swayed dangerously in the storm. After about half an hour of chaos, the strange cloud had vanished, and the skies were cleared once again. But on the Isle of Wight, people strolling along the cliffs and shore saw something much worse. Before the storm hit, they had admired the sight of the Royal Navy frigate HMS Eurydice sailing calmly under full sail, returning home from the Caribbean. But the thing was, after the cloud had passed, the frigate was completely gone. Only a coal schooner, the Emma, remained in sight. Captain Langworthy Jenkin of the Emma quickly realized something was wrong. He saw wreckage in the water and heard faint cries for help. He then ordered his crew to investigate, and they ended up finding 5 men, though only 2 were still alive. The rest of the crew, as well as the frigate itself, had vanished beneath the waves. There was nearly 400 people aboard and only 2 survived, which was Sidney Fletcher, an ordinary seaman, and Able Seaman Cuddiford. HMS Eurydice had been a training frigate refitted to carry officers, sailors, and boys on training voyages. The ship had set sail from Portsmouth in November 1877 for a 4-month cruise to the Caribbean, and by March 1878 she was nearing the Isle of Wight, returning home. The crew, along with the passengers, had been enjoying the calm afternoon, unaware of the approaching danger. According to survivors' accounts, the storm struck suddenly. The crew was ordered to take in the sails, but there was no time. The wind then lifted the frigate, and waves crashed over the deck, flooding the ship. Below deck, many were trapped and drowned, while those above were swept into the sea or battered by the waves. Within minutes, the ship capsized and sank. Admiral Fanshawe, the commander-in-chief at Portsmouth, took the testimonies of the 2 survivors. Cuddiford recounted how he had clung to the ship's side before being thrown into the water. He fortunately managed to find a lifebuoy, but saw others in the water who could not survive the cold and the storm. Only Cuddiford and Fletcher lasted long enough to be rescued by the Emma. The rest of the crew and passengers perished in the violent storm. News of the disaster quickly spread, causing a lot of shock and grief for a lot of people. Families gathered in Portsmouth, desperate for the news of their loved ones. Queen Victoria sent her condolences, expressing her sorrow for the loss. Few bodies were also ever recovered, and most of the crew remained trapped inside the wreck, which lay at the bottom of the English Channel. Efforts, though, were made to raise the Eurydice from the depths. But yeah, moving away from all the details of what actually happened, the mystery part is more so concerned about the strange cigar-shaped cloud that appeared before the storm. It still remains unexplained, and no scientific explanation was ever given for its formation or its destructive force. Today, only a few relics of the Eurydice remain in museums and private collections. The Donkey Man. In 1949, the Port Pirie, a 10,500-ton freighter, was docked at the Sydney waterfront after completing its journey from the United Kingdom. The night shift in the engine room fell to Jonesy, the sixth engineer, who had the task of repacking the swing arms of the port main engine. This required him to work most of the night inside the stifling crankcase of the engine. His only companion was the Donkey Man, who was a new hire and was tasked with tending to the oil-fired Cochrane boiler. Their shift started at 11 p.m., and it was clear it would be a long shift since their shift ended at 7 a.m. The engine room this day felt unusually quiet. Other than the low hum of the diesel engine, the usual mechanical noises were absent. The air was hot and thick with steam, which was a pretty big contrast to the fresh air outside on the deck. Jonesy and the Donkey Man then descended to the engine room's plating, passing by the still propeller shafts and the unbearably hot fire room. Jonesy often thought about how deck officers rarely appreciated the importance of the engine room, only paying attention when something went wrong. After a while, Jonesy checked in with the Donkey Man, who confirmed everything was running smoothly. Jonesy suggested the Donkey Man head up to get some sleep, and they agreed to switch off around 3 a.m. Left alone, Jonesy focused on his task inside the crankcase. The faint sound of the feed pump working in the boiler room provided a comforting rhythm, which Jonesy referred to as the engineer's lullaby. The steady sound of the pump assured him that the boiler was being filled with water. Suddenly though, the pump started acting erratically, speeding up without reason. Concerned, Jonesy climbed out of the crankcase and headed to the boiler room, where he found the pump working much harder than necessary. Despite this, the boiler gauge indicated it was nearly full, which didn't explain the pump's behavior. Confused, Jonesy shut off the pump and returned to work, but the problem still persisted. The pump began running at full speed again, even though he had shut it off. Frustrated, he locked the valve tightly with the wheel key, ensuring it couldn't be tampered with. Confident that the issue was resolved, he went back to the crankcase. Yet again, the pump began working at full speed. At this point, Jonesy decided to check the boiler gauge one more time, and this time he realized the truth, that the gauge had been malfunctioning. The boiler was dangerously low on water, and if not for the pump's erratic behavior, the boiler could have exploded, causing severe damage to the engine room and possibly the entire ship. Jonesy broke out in a cold sweat as the gravity of the situation hit him. The feed pump, acting out of the ordinary, had inadvertently saved them from disaster. He then finished his work on the swing arms and handed over the watch at 4 a.m., exhausted from the tense night. He couldn't shake away the unease that lingered even after his shift ended, and sleep didn't come easily. Later that day, during lunch in the engineers' dining saloon, Jonesy still felt off. The senior second engineer noticed his tired appearance and jokingly asked if he'd been drinking. Jonesy replied vaguely, but couldn't resist telling the story of the strange events from the night before. He described how the feed pump had run uncontrollably despite his efforts to stop it, and how the boiler gauge had been completely wrong. The senior engineer listened quietly, lit a cigarette, and then offered a cryptic explanation. He revealed that the first Donkey Man aboard the Port Pirie, who had signed on after the ship was commissioned, had died in a boiler explosion caused by low water. His last words were that such a tragedy would never happen again. The senior engineer suggested that the ghost of the former Donkey Man might have intervened to prevent the disaster from happening a second time. Jonesy found the thought pretty terrifying though. Could it have been a ghost that actually saved him from catastrophe? He didn't know what to make of it, but he couldn't deny that something beyond his understanding and something of mystery had occurred that night. The Ghost Captain. In 1899, the captain of a 3-masted bark was an ordinary middle-aged man on land, but at sea he became known for his strength and determination. With a slight build and a graying beard, he had commanded his ship for over 15 years. Though skeptical of haunted ships, one voyage would change his perspective for good. His ship, though not the fastest, had earned a reputation for dependability, including a notable London to Calcutta run in 81 days. As steam-powered ships began to dominate the seas, the bark was assigned to various routes, eventually returning to Indian ports for her final years. Then, in midwinter 1899, the ship departed from London River with a crew of 68 officers, seamen, and 4 apprentices. The ship's apprentices, young men working toward deep-sea qualifications, included one senior apprentice soon to become second mate. That night, 4 reluctant seamen were brought aboard by a crimp, men who owed debts and seemed unfit for the voyage. The first mate was dissatisfied with their condition, but the ship still sailed on with the wind in her sails. The captain, seated in his cabin, signed on the 4 new seamen while explaining the process to the senior apprentice. As the apprentice left for coffee, he passed the new seamen, who were being teased by the ship's cook. The cook, a large man with a twisted expression from a past illness, enjoyed playing on the fears of new crew members. He told them a tale about the haunted captain, recounting how the captain once drove the ship through a fierce storm in the Bay of Bengal, which led to the death of a helmsman. According to Cook, the helmsman's ghost had haunted the ship ever since, with one crewman claiming to have seen the ghost before fleeing and never returning. Despite the cook's story though, the captain was far from the monster he was made out to be. Over lime juice with a passenger, the captain recounted his own brush with the supernatural. On a previous voyage from Melbourne, a crewman reported hearing a strange noise in the forecastle. Skeptical but thorough, the captain organized a search and found the source, which was a young woman suffering from a mental disturbance. The so-called ghost was nothing more than a rattling rope, and the ship was certainly not haunted. The bark made steady progress around the Cape of Good Hope, but as it neared Bombay, the weather took a turn for the worse. The barometer fell and a gale soon hit the ship. Monstrous seas ripped sails from their ropes, flooded cabins, and sent debris flying across the deck. The crew worked tirelessly to keep the ship afloat, deploying oil bags to calm the waves. Despite their efforts, the storm showed no signs of relenting. During the middle watch, the helmsman, weary from the storm, confided in their senior apprentice. He expressed doubt in the ship's mates, admitting that he planned to leave the ship once they reached Bombay. The helmsman believed the mates could no longer handle the challenges of the sea. As they spoke, they were interrupted by a tall man with a scar running from his temple to his lips. This stranger, barrel-chested and commanding, ordered the helmsman to change course to nor-northeast. Startled, the helmsman hesitated, unsure whether to follow the order without confirmation from the captain. The apprentice sought guidance from the second mate, who allowed the course change after some deliberation. At dawn, the captain was awakened by shouts from the deck. Through the mist, the crew spotted 4 lifeboats filled with survivors of a shipwreck. Their vessel had caught fire and burned down to the waterline, and their captain had been killed during the disaster. The survivors were then brought aboard, weak and injured, while the remains of their ship drifted away. Later that morning, a body was spotted floating in the water. It was a tall, barrel-chested man with a scarred face. It was the same man who had ordered the course change that saved them during the night. The ghost captain had come aboard to ensure his crew's rescue. The search for Ravensted. Ravensted, a medieval port town on England's east coast, thrived during the 13th and 14th centuries. It was located on a sand pit near present-day Spurn Point in East Riding of Yorkshire. Its name is rooted in Old Norse Ravensur, meaning raven's tongue, while Od comes from Ode, meaning a promontory. The strategic location made Ravensted a bustling trade hub, attracting merchants and ships alike. Founded in the mid-13th century, possibly by the Counts of Umal, the town's prosperity grew rapidly. Then, by 1299, it had over 100 houses, which was a remarkable number for the time and operated a flourishing market. Its rise in prominence was reflected in its ability to collect dues from over 100 ships annually. Ravensted was a larger, more prosperous port than Kingston upon Hull during its peak, even sending representatives to the Model Parliament of 1295. However, Ravenssed's fortunes began to change due to coastal erosion and shifts in the Humber River's course, which eroded the town's foundations. The most significant blow came in the winter of 1356 to 1357 when a series of storms and floods devastated England's coast. Ravensted was then heavily flooded, forcing its residents to flee. The town ended up being abandoned, and in 1362, the St. Marcellus flood, which was a catastrophic event that swept across Europe, completely submerged the remaining structures. This flood obliterated Ravensted, erasing it from the coastline. Centuries later, efforts are being made to rediscover the lost port. Led by Professor Dan Parsons and using ecosounder technology, researchers have scanned the seafloor around Spurn Point, detecting potential remnants of the medieval town. The team plans to expand their search area and eventually deploy divers to confirm the findings, but yeah, for now, it's still pretty much mystery. The Admiral Carpfanger. The Admiral Carpfanger was a four-masted bark operated by the Hamburg-Amerika Line, one of the leading shipping companies in the early 20th century. Although steamships were becoming dominant, Hamburg-Amerika believed in the value of sail training for cadets. The ship was purchased to provide officer cadets with hands-on seamanship experience, teaching them the discipline and skills necessary at sea. Built in the 1980s as L'Avenir for the Australian grain trade, the bark had been used by the Belgian Navy as a training ship and later as a commercial vessel under Finnish ownership before Hamburg-Amerika acquired it in 1937. Renamed Admiral Carpfanger, the ship was updated with modern navigation equipment, radio systems, and auxiliary diesel engines, making it a well-equipped training vessel. Then, in September 1937, the Admiral Carpfanger set out on its first voyage as a training ship, with a crew of 60, most of them cadets eager to find their first seafaring experience. Under Captain Walker's command, the ship sailed from Hamburg to Australia, reaching Port Germain in South Australia after an uneventful 4-month journey. The cadets learned practical seamanship and theoretical subjects like navigation and maritime law during the trip. For many, this voyage was their first time away from home, and they quickly adapted to the demanding routine of life at sea. After spending 4 weeks in Australia to unload cargo, repair the ship, and prepare for the return trip, the Admiral Carpfanger was loaded with 43,000 bags of wheat for its non-stop voyage back to Hamburg. The ship then departed Port Germain on February 8, 1938, with the cadets anticipating their return home. In the first few weeks, a few radio signals were received, though some were weak. The last clear message, though, came on March 1st, reporting the ship's position 1,500 miles south of Wellington, New Zealand, indicating it was behind schedule but with no signs of distress. Then, on March 12, the Hamburg-Amerika Line received a routine message from the ship, which turned out to be its last communication. The second mate, who had recently become a father, sent a message to his wife. When the ship failed to send its next scheduled message, concern grew, but the silence was initially attributed to possible radio malfunctions. Hamburg-Amerika reassured families that the Admiral Carpfanger was not on a common shipping route and might take time to be spotted by other vessels. However, as April turned to May and still no news came, fears escalated. By June, the situation became dire. Reports of unusually large icebergs near Cape Horn added to the concern. A British steamer, the SS Durham, had encountered massive icebergs in the area, some over a mile long. But yeah, by now, it became clear that something had gone terribly wrong. Hamburg-Amerika then dispatched the Luena, a freighter, to search for the missing ship, while the Argentine government sent the Bahia Blanca to search the southern coast and nearby islands. Despite their efforts, no trace of the Admiral Carpfanger was ever found. By September, the Admiral Carpfanger was officially declared lost. The announcement was met with sorrow, especially for the young cadets who had just begun their careers. Ships around the world flew their flags at half-mast, and Lloyd's of London marked the loss with the toll of the Lutyens Belle on September 21, 1938. Despite extensive searches, the mystery of what happened to the ship remained unsolved. Several theories, though, have emerged. One possibility was that the ship encountered trouble while rounding Cape Horn, an area known for dangerous seas. It might have wrecked on reefs or islands in the region, or perhaps the crew, pressured by the ship's delayed schedule, pushed the vessel too hard. Another theory suggested that the Admiral Carpfanger collided with one of the massive icebergs reported in the area, sinking quickly without the chance to send a distress signal. Some wreckage was eventually found. Pieces of wood believed to be from the Admiral Carpfanger washed up on the Navarin and Wollaston Islands near Cape Horn. A door with a plaque reading Kapitan und Offizier was identified as coming from the ship, confirming the Admiral Carpfanger had been lost in that region. However, no substantial evidence or survivors were ever found, leaving the exact cause of the disaster a mystery.